Test it. Test.
Good. Oh, it works, okay.
All right, San said we could get started. It's just a little bit after 7. My name is Kyle Van Arsdal. I'm the pastor here, and he asked if I would just welcome you guys to this presentation that he has prepared for you. Well, this is the sanctuary in here, and the other building is where we have the bathrooms. If you need to use those, they're over there. He also has a handout. Hopefully, Ivy, I think she hit everybody as you came in, got the handout and the cool Eclipse glasses. And there's water back there as well if you get hot. It actually feels pretty nice in here. So, but welcome. I know he has some very interesting things for us. So he asked if I would open with a prayer. So let's, if you are willing, pray with me. Father, we give you thanks. Thanks for creating an ordered world that we can look at and understand something about you. Lord, thank you for the systems and the order that displays an intelligent design, a mind. Lord, something beyond just all this stuff. Lord, thank you for all that you do to show us your love and to show us your greatness. But Lord, we pray that you'd be with Sand as he presents today. Lord, give him clarity in what he wants to say. Help him to say and get the passion that he has for this out and to pass it on to us. But Lord, we just thank you for this opportunity to hear what he has to say and ask your blessing upon him and all of us in Jesus' name. All right, we'll have San come up and we'll get started. Yes, Dr. Keys. Oh, all right, good idea. Okay, yeah, Dr. Keys suggested since it is the anniversary of 9/11, let's just take a 1-minute silence and remember the loss of life that was there, the sacrifices that were made.
Thank you, Pastor Kyle. Appreciate that. Ivy, when you get a minute, I would like Ivy to bring up that black bag that I left up at the front, or somebody can get that for me. I am Sand. Greetings, and thank you so much, all my friends and my family and folks in Moab and everywhere else. Thanks to Community Church, Christian Education Committee. Thanks to James Ritchie on the piano. Wasn't that beautiful? I thought that was really... Well, we all have something in common. This is all our very first supernatural eclipse presentation. And I hope it's entertaining. But if you do get tired, you can always just put these on. And nobody will know the difference. I'm going to talk about solar eclipses tonight. Part of my talk is just a study in coincidence, and part of it is attempts to roughly outline the very real but much ignored cosmic clock that actually has been in place forever. Also, there's an overview of some extremely unusual eclipses that we're going to go through, including the big one that's coming up here in 33 days. Part of what's interesting about eclipses is the way they dance around with anniversaries. And anniversaries are realer than we sometimes think. Thank you so much, dear. We are living in a significant anniversary today, as we just commemorated 9/11. And sometimes you can feel the presence of anniversary, though that feeling may not always be definable. It's good to remember, though, that today actually is a lot like it was 22 years ago today. The light was about the same. The sun rose in the same spot. The moon is very close to the phase it was then, a waxing crescent. And it turns out that today is very, very much like it was 19 years ago today. But I'll get to that later. There's going to be plenty of dates and place names and numbers tonight. Please don't let it make you dizzy. Eclipses are very much like music or poetry or art. You don't need to worry about them. You just have to let it roll by like you're at a concert. Most of it's really easy to get, and some of it isn't, even for the greatest astronomers living today. Understanding any of it is not vital to your character or your job prospects or your salvation. But I hope consideration of the solar eclipse helps you gain some insight into the interwoven magnitude of the reality we live in. And perhaps some of you may be encouraged to consider deeper relationships with the creator of this reality in your own personal life. My singular intent is to do the best in public that I can to describe a phenomenon. which to my knowledge has not been described in public in detail much before, if at all. It's my distinct privilege to present my 3 years of work to my hometown. It's my favorite place on planet Earth, Moab, Utah. And I will contend tonight that the solar eclipse is the strangest occurrence in natural reality. In fact, it's so unusual as to be almost impossible. The question of the whole presentation is this: could such a bizarre and precise phenomenon exist without authorship? And if there is an author, would he create such a phenomenon for no particular reason? And if there is a reason, what is it? My contention, as you might imagine, is that the evidence indicates there is indeed an author, an extremely powerful one. His reason? Well, he might have several reasons. Complete solar... Oops, I got to do this, right? Yep. Complete solar eclipses appear because of an alignment in the apparent size of the moon and sun, what is often called the great coincidence. They appear when they do with cycles that are even greater coincidences. They appear where they do in cohort with other coincidences. And these cycles are achieving a kind of maximum expression right now. I will try and show you what I mean. Now, what is maximum expression? I use this term a lot. I use the term maximum expression to describe the peak outgrowth of matter, life, personality, civilization, art, etc. Maximum expression is the fullest agreement of individual form with eternal meaning. Meaning, it can be positive or negative. Is there any way to turn that TV on so that when I look at it, I can really... We also live at a maximum expression in human history, which is a crossroads marked by the creation and rapid spread of a powerful global network. Things are changing fast. Do solar eclipses mark past history? Do they mark our present times? We'll take a look. Our present time approaches the greatest anniversary ever to be celebrated on planet Earth. It's the 2000th anniversary of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Though you haven't heard much about it yet, you will soon. This anniversary happens sometime in the next 10 years. Over the last 3 years, I compiled a book of information and hand-drawn maps chronicling various attributes of, thank you so much, Bernie, solar eclipses and their cycles. I also chronicled every world eclipse for the last 150 years and all American solar eclipses since 1492. The book is 435 pages long, so if I figure I get started now, we should be wrapped up by Thursday morning. Hope that works for you. Out come the glasses. Just kidding. My presentation will be hopefully less than an hour and 20 minutes, hour and a half at tops. I'll stop early if it gets to be an hour and 20. In case you're wondering, it's about an hour and 20. Well, the new Barbie movie is an hour and 54 minutes long. So my talk is shorter than Barbie. Oppenheimer is 3 hours long, if you can imagine me talking about eclipses for 3 hours. Barbie and Oppenheimer. It is quite interesting that America's two biggest movies right now are Barbie and Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb and the mother of all American girl body image issues. Only in America. But there is something profound in juxtaposition, right? Juxtaposition often creates riddles. It creates art. It creates poetry and music. Juxtaposition, the placing of two characters in one set, is the foundation of art. Eclipses are juxtapositions. Here's the Barbie eclipse glasses. I couldn't afford them. By the way, Hollywood will see 70% coverage in the coming eclipse, if you want to go check it out there. Okay, why is the singing Dude Ranch cowboy guy telling me this? And not some certified eclipse scientist who actually went to school for such things. I mean, scientists give lectures and TED Talks and have real telescopes and get big grants. When people see me around town, I'm usually singing Margaritaville or popping tumbleweeds. Why me? Why indeed? Well, it ain't for the money. Ain't for the glory. It's for one reason. Because the phenomenon I'm about to describe has not been publicly described, and it deserves to be described. And if it takes a hay farmer to do it, so be it. Over the course of 3 centuries, eclipses became assigned to a very small niche of astronomical science. Because they are so infrequent in any one place, the excitement they create is forgotten quickly, and decades can pass before they happen again. Also, their mechanics have been almost completely understood since the 1700s, and nearly all their past and future paths have been mapped since the late 1800s. There's seemingly not much left to do with eclipses, so they've been largely filed away as been there, done that in astronomical science. Eclipses don't tend to provide any new great inventions for people to make money on. They're not like inventing cruise missiles or phone apps. There's exceptions among scientists. There's some really good eclipse scientists out there. But in general, the solar eclipse only occupies a couple of pages in college astronomy courses, gathering dust in its little corner of the huge scientific universe, apparently fully explained and defined. Well, there's only one odd thing about that. You see, once upon a time, every culture in the world didn't believe that. They believed that the appearance of a solar eclipse was a sign from God or the gods. That right there makes it very different from virtually all other scientific subjects. There really isn't anything else quite like a solar eclipse, except maybe comets. And they aren't nearly as rare or dramatic, believe it or not. Way more people see a comet in their life than see a complete solar eclipse. Perhaps the reason the full extent of eclipses has not been explored is because their expressions cross many different fields of human study. Astronomy, mathematics, physics, optics, science, history, geography, theology, art, music, poetry. Modern academic study is highly specialized, and it doesn't exactly lend itself to seeing the forest for the trees, so to speak. So maybe I'll try it out. Whoops. What this presentation is not. It's not astrology. I do not follow or understand astrology. I don't believe the sun and moon are sentient entities, much less gods. I am guilty, however, of drawing smiley faces on them. There's no numerology, though there's plenty of numbers. There's no theology, though the information I present may or may not be useful to various spiritual traditions. It's not a specifically evangelical presentation, though I personally believe in God and Jesus and the Bible. There's no alternative science tonight. I use the same old familiar astronomical and chronological measurements everybody else does. Commonly understood history and geography, etc. I believe the earth is round, the sun is big, and the moon is not made of green cheese. It's actually tapioca pudding. As I said, I do not believe in a flat earth, nor does the Bible. Egyptian astronomers 5,000 years ago knew the world was round, and that knowledge has been pretty much passed on to every major culture since, though a large myth has rose up that somehow everybody used to believe the earth was flat. The writers of the Bible believed the earth was round. If you're going to quote the Bible on the shape of the earth, you read Isaiah. The Lord sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and its people are like grasshoppers. Sounds about right. What was new was that in 1543, Copernicus discovered that Earth and planets revolve around the sun. Now, that was revolutionary, and it did change thought quite a bit. Again, there's nothing occult or anything tonight. Occult means hidden knowledge. This knowledge is not hidden. It just sort of disappeared into the blind spot somewhere along the line. Speaking of blind spots, there's nothing political here. I don't belong to any political party, academic institution, or, Lord forbid, think tank. I do bring up history. Now, history is often used for political reasons and purposes. History is selectively edited, amplified, or ignored for various political agendas, for various power trips from various power trippers. You'll find this abuse of history happening on all sides of what they call the political spectrum. The reality is that empires behave like empires, and people behave like people. The history of empire is not butterflies and roses. And we are in an empire whether we like to think of it or not. This presentation is not anti-science. I like science as much as the next guy. Love nature shows, panda bears, internal combustion engines. Science is an excellent servant and a terrible master. I'm grateful for Neosporin and refrigerators and anesthesia. And I like astronomy. But science also makes poison gas and killer robots. It's not a black and white thing. I'm always grateful for scientists who are aware of those kind of blind spots and the big issues at hand, and there are many of them. I am grateful to scientists who encourage the kind of dialogue science is intended to be. Well, what is this presentation then? It's just pattern recognition. Oh, pattern recognition. Oh well, pattern recognition is how we survive. It's how bugs and birds and people find food and shelter and each other. It's how the very cells in our bodies keep us alive. But still we hear a constant cliche, well, you can find patterns anywhere. And the inevitable, given enough data points, coincidences are inevitable. It's true. If you're looking for people with matching license plates in Salt Lake or matching birthdays at the university, it's very true. But if my wallet keeps ending up in your pocket, must I always consider it coincidence? When does coincidence cease to be impossible? This is not about trivial coincidences. It's not about finding my shoe size in your phone number. It's about patterns in the most unusual, bizarre synchronicity in all cosmic reality, in the fact that every now and then, intelligent life watches their apparently identical sized moon pass before the sun. There were 177 complete solar eclipses over the last 130 years on planet Earth. That's a very small database. I will present to you only a tiny percentage of the peculiarities I found. For everything else I present tonight, I'm leaving 20 things out. And then you can decide for yourselves whether they all scream coincidence. They may. But if even one of them stretches the boundaries of coincidence, perhaps that would be reason to give the entire idea a closer look if we are all indeed scientists. This is different than most intelligent design evidence because it's not based on the functionality of the design, but its aesthetic form. Is the evidence undeniable? No, of course not. You can deny anything. It's easy to deny something. That's what social media is for. But confronting our own personal and social blind spots that are formed over the course of many generations, that can be kind of harder. I'm going to go to the piano and try to make a point. That could be just about anything. One of those is random, or apparently random, and one of them isn't, right? One of them could be created by any sort of large object hitting the keys of a certain instrument, and one of them is clearly the result of somebody trying to play Twinkle, Twinkle. The information that decides which one is which is intuitive and comes from within the human being, and that is where the meaning is assigned. Pattern recognition. Form, authorship, purpose, lesson. Portray the perform of the phenomena, playing the keys as opposed to pounding them. Authorship, to acknowledge the presence of an author, the reality of an author. Somebody played it. To approach the author's idea of intent or purpose, though I can't say for sure I can answer it. The lesson is a personal matter for everybody. It could be the only lesson you get from tonight is never go to another supernatural eclipse presentation. Before I get started with our eclipse that's coming up in 33 days, I want to present to you a few world eclipse oddities. I could give you 100, believe it or not, but here's some for starters. In 1912, a total eclipse crossed the Atlantic and Europe 2 days after the Titanic sank, including 90% coverage at the Titanic port of Southampton. 700, almost half, of the Titanic victims were residents of Southampton, including more than 500 crew members. 2 years later, on August 21st, 1914, a total eclipse crossed the Ottoman Empire and Europe in the very first days of World War I. 17 days after the first shots were fired, the exact very day that the first British soldier was killed in battle, and 2 weeks before the first Battle of the Marne, where 500,000 men were killed and wounded in 1 week. Here's the cross that the two eclipses made over Europe. Here's the Shahrud Tav, or cross, intersecting total eclipses over the nation of Iran. The first occurred in 1952, and the second traveled from the US to Iran in 1954. What was that time? Between these dates of the two eclipses, in August 1953, the US helped overthrow the democratic government of Iran and install the Shah, Reza Pahlavi, instead. Where do these eclipses intersect in Iran? Over the city of Shahrud, Iran, meaning city of the Shah. On July 9th, 1945, the very day White Sands Missile Range is established in New Mexico, and the decision is made to test the first atom bomb there, there is a total eclipse between the United States and the USSR. This is 1 week before the first atom bomb goes off. This is the only USA total eclipse between the years of 1932 and 1954. It's the only USSR total eclipse between 1936 and 1950. And this is one of only 2 total eclipses ever to connect the US and Russia in the last 200 years. And the other one was in 1954. Therefore, you have these levels of peculiarity. Speaking of Oppenheimer, who watched the first bomb blow up in New Mexico 1 week after a total eclipse connected the 2 great nuclear powers, Oppenheimer quoted from the Hindu god Shiva in the Bhagavad Gita, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The most famous physicist, almost, since besides Einstein perhaps, of the 20th century. Oh, here's the new physicists at CERN, where they try to bash holes in the dimensional time-space fabric. Oh, who do they have a statue of in the courtyard? There they're plotting Shiva. There's the CERN, where they spin those atoms around. The Vietnam War is officially said to have begun November 1st, 1955. Here are the only 2 complete eclipses of 1955. As you can see, they intersect over Vietnam. These were the longest duration solar eclipses of the last millennium. 1 total and 1 ring of fire. The war in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos perhaps killed 10 million people over the course of 30 years. Here's the 1944 and 1948 eclipses over Southeast Asia. The top one is the Korean eclipse of 1948, which divided North and South Korea along the 38th parallel 2 years before the war there that killed 10 million people. Here is the total 6 eclipse swarm over Southeast Asia between 1944 and 1965. Bangkok, Thailand had 4 complete eclipses in 10 years. All told, perhaps 25 million people died in that, I'm going the wrong way. Hold on. 25 million people died in that archipelago right there between 1945 and 1980. That's not even counting the similar number of casualties in China's civil war, which is affected by several of those eclipses. In 1919, there are 2 complete eclipses. The longest duration eclipses up to that point in nearly 1,000 years. These are the same eclipses that went over to Vietnam later. One occurs on May 29th. That's John F. Kennedy's second birthday. It was called Einstein's eclipse. That eclipse was used by research teams in South America and Africa to prove the fourth dimension of time and the theory of relativity. The next eclipse that occurs is on John F. Kennedy's death day, November 22nd, 44 years before his murders. That lower eclipse is happening on November 22nd, 1919, 44 years before JFK dies. Look where it comes from. It starts at sunrise in Texas, the state where he will be murdered. It goes over the home of 10-year-old Lyndon Johnson in Stonewall, Texas, the man who will replace Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963. That ring of fire eclipse then covers the entire nation of Cuba, the only eclipse to do such a thing in 500 years. And Cuba, of course, is where Kennedy's fate would be entwined. Oops. Oh, there's the November 22nd eclipse right there. Oh, look. Wuhan, China was in totality in July 2009, with the longest eclipse of the 21st century. December 26, 2019, exactly 11 eclipse years later, which I'll explain to you later, after the Wuhan eclipse, there's this interesting eclipse. Now check out that December 26, 2019 path. It goes from northern Indonesia to Sri Lanka and on to Arabia. What was December 26, 2019? Well, it was the exact 15th anniversary of the great tsunami of December 26, 2004, the greatest magnitude natural disaster in human history. If you look at the path, the tsunami left Indonesia and Sumatra to Sri Lanka on to Oman, Arabia. So we have an eclipse on the 15th anniversary of the tsunami on the same path just as a pandemic starts. 18% coverage in Wuhan, just as the first cases are announced. There's the eclipse path. There's the tsunami. As I mentioned earlier, there were August 21st, 1914 in Europe had the eclipse, but there were 3 eclipses on August 21st in the last century. 19 years to the day after the World War I eclipse, on August 21st, 1933, there was a ring of fire in Jerusalem, just as the Nazis consolidated power and passed the first anti-Jewish laws. The eclipse was also passed over Babylon and Egypt, Syria, and Persia. It occurred weeks after the massacre of thousands of Assyrian Christians in Simele, Syria, killed thousands of people. So August 21st, 1914, August 21st, 1933, again, August 21st, 2017. You remember that one? This time over the United States. The eclipse touched no other nation. It was the first in 500 years to do that geographic tightrope, and the first total eclipse in 38 years, dividing the nation almost perfectly in half. Now, what's going on 2023? What's happening October 14th? The moon will go completely in front of the sun from our perspective. This alignment creates a unique shadow. It's a ring of fire or annular eclipse along a 125-mile wide path and about 9,000 miles long from Oregon to Brazil. The 4 corners are in the path, begins around 9:10 in Moab, peaks around 10:20. This is close to what it may look like in Moab. There won't be a camel, though. Be side-by-sides, right? This is probably closer to what it will look like south of here. If you're around, and that's probably going to be, I don't know if I bump in that or not, but we'll see. If you're around trees, they cast crescents on the ground. That's awfully fun. If you're not, you can take a pinhole camera and punch a little hole in a piece of cardstock, and you can cast the picture of the sun anywhere you'd like, or you've got the eclipse glasses now. It will be intense fractalized light. The closer it gets to the moon going in front, the stranger the light will be. There is no way to simulate that light, and there's no way to photograph it. But it will happen, and it will freak animals out as it gets right into the fractals. But they typically handle it okay. As I said, the Four Corners, your best place to watch. Take your pick. Going down south, right, you'll get to see it. Even Monticello has 2.5 minutes of annularity. You get down and toward Bluff, Lake Powell, all that country, it's going to be tons. Hanksville is really good. Blanding's great. So this is the first eclipse in the Four Corners since 2012. You think, oh, well, that's it. But that one was the first eclipse in the Four Corners since 1713. When was the last time Moab actually had an eclipse go right over the top, which is not going to happen this time? When was the last time? Meaning not a partial, but when the moon goes completely in front. The last time Moab had a complete eclipse was October 17th, 1259 AD, 764 years ago. They can go a long time between places. But Moab will have one in 2045, a total eclipse, which will also be the next total eclipse in the whole United States after 2024. Check. Hey. Check.
Is it red light on?
There's a red light on this one too.
Okay.
Check. Hey. Nibbled on sponge cake. 2045 is when the transhumanists say we're all going to become part of the global computer network. Woohoo! That's what this guy wants. So be sure and set your brain chip so you can spend cyber eternity with these cats. Hey. Hip happening, folks. Complete eclipses happen in any one place about once every 400 years by average, but averages mean very little. As I said, Moab only had 764 years between eclipses, but in the last 500 years, New Orleans has seen 7 complete eclipses. Cape Canaveral has had 6. San Antonio has had 8. It's a phenomenon highlighted by swarms and absences. Now, as it turns out, October 14th, 2023 is peculiar for a number of reasons. Let's go back to 2012 for the last Four Corners eclipse. Those were the days, right? All we had to worry about then was the end of the Mayan calendar. I remember the eclipse in late afternoon. I was riding with those people in that pew right over there, my family. We were horseback in the Book Cliffs. It was the first complete eclipse in the U.S. in 18 years, when another ring of fire had cut across the USA north to south. Between 1994 and 2012, there was great change in America, as we know. Much of that change occurred during the presidency of George W. Bush. So it's indeed odd that the 2012 Ring of Fire ended directly at sunset over his boyhood home of Midland, Texas. Also, it was interesting that that same eclipse began at sunrise offshore of Hanoi, Vietnam. That day was the 506th anniversary of the death of Christopher Columbus. Now fast forward to our time, 12 eclipse years later, and we come to the date. Bernie, you're just the best.
See if that works.
Can we give Bernie a big eclipse round of applause? Check. Hey. Watching the sun bake. Covered with all. Okay, I'm going to get James back on the piano. We're going to do it. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you listening to the eclipse stuff. 12 eclipse years exactly later, I'll explain when eclipse years is later, we come to the date of October 14th. Now, we all know that Columbus Day is October 12th, right? That's when Nina the Pinta, Santa Maria, and all that stuff, right? That was the day Columbus set foot in the New World in 1492. But October 14th is perhaps a more important date. It is perhaps one of the most important dates, the date of this eclipse. It's probably perhaps one of the most important dates in the history of the world. Because on that day, October 14th, 1492, 2 days after his arrival, Columbus kidnapped 7 native youth to be his guides in the Caribbean. This is the anniversary of the first crime of the old world against the new. The October 14th eclipse connects North and South America in a tremendously symmetrical pattern. There has not been any eclipse to connect the two continents of North and South America in such a way since October 13th, 1632. Very closely similar date to ours. There is 40% eclipse on this date at the site of the colonial crime in San Salvador, which is now called Wahani. The eclipse that's coming up in 33 days, it bisects Colombia, the only nation on earth named for Columbus. And it exits at Natal, which is Portuguese for nativity. The 4 corners are almost perfectly eclipsed. The only place in the world where 4 distinct geographic boundaries form a cross. Crosses 3 of the 4 sacred Navajo mountains, Navajo Mountain in Utah, Mount Taylor in New Mexico, in Colorado, and also passes over Window Rock, Arizona, capital of the Navajo Nation. Covers the entirety of Lake Powell, the cross of the 4 corners, Bears Ears, Capitol Reef, Bryce Canyon. The eclipse crosses Chaco Canyon, ceremonial center of the Anasazi. Goes over Acoma Pueblo, the oldest continuously inhabited village in North America since 1150. Passes over Santa Fe, Albuquerque, and Los Alamos, the birthplace of the atomic bomb. Goes over Roswell, New Mexico, where the flying saucer event happened in 1947 and where real space aliens have shops on Main Street. So in the middle of the eclipses, on every level, up, down, around, backwards, forwards, wherever you go, and I'm only giving you 1 out of 20 here, there are peculiarities. Here's a curiosity. October 14th is the 133rd birthday of Dwight Eisenhower, born October 14th, 1890. But interestingly, the last solar eclipse, 6 months ago, happened on April 20th, which was Adolf Hitler's 134th birthday. He was born April 1889. Eisenhower and Hitler were enemies in World War II, and if any one man could be given credit for personifying the victory over Hitler, it would be Eisenhower. October 14th, 2023 in Texas, the path again goes over West Texas, again crosses Midland, home of George H.W. Bush's oil business and the boyhood home of George W. It's the second USA ring of fire in a row to touch Midland, and the third in a row to directly impact it. San Antonio is in the annularity, the largest city to receive annularity. And the precise center line of the eclipse exits over Corpus Christi, or Body of Christ. That's the only major city named that in the world. It's also part of a curious hieroglyph over the USA. You see the A, right? Well, this hieroglyph appeared one time before. In 1999, 2005, and 2006, these same eclipse personalities that are over America appeared over the Mediterranean and all the first empires of the human race. These are the 2 eclipse crosses of 2017 to 2034. These are unusual patterns, considering these are the first and last national empires of the human race. You see the one over the United States, over a place called Little Egypt southern Illinois. Been named that for 200 years. It's where Cairo, Illinois is, and Memphis, Egypt, and all that. And you see the other eclipse pair intersecting over southern southeast Egypt, near the Valley of the Kings, the great necropolis. The eclipse pair over America occurs 2,422 days apart, 7 eclipse years. Both eclipses happen on a Monday. The eclipses over the Egypt occur 2,422 days apart, 7 eclipse years. They both happen on a Monday. All 4 of those eclipses happen on Mondays. We live in the exact time of the 2000th anniversary of the birth, childhood, adulthood, and ministry of Jesus Christ, from whom the world receives its historical dating system. This is probably the most significant worldwide anniversary in the history of the human race. We also live in the same metonic cycle as Jesus did, which is a cycle that comes around all the time, constantly shifting every 400 to 500 years, and it's marked by matching eclipse dates. The exact apex of Little Egypt here in the United States occurs over this place. And just going to have to do this again. I'm just going to have to turn this on and forget about this little thing. That's okay. It's all right. I don't mind it. Check. I think I have a problem with projection. So right in the middle of the apex of the American cross is a 111-foot tall cross. This is right in the middle of it. It's called the Bald Knob Cross of Peace. Once the tallest cross in the Western Hemisphere. The apex of the other cross, Egypt and the Western Red Sea. Exact apex over a place called St. John's Island, very near the Valley of the Kings. Home of the temples of Karnak and the great city of the dead. Burial place of Ramses and King Tut, dozens more pharaohs. Our ring of fire in October creates this A, the Aleph. The first empire on earth was Egypt. Virtually all historians agree with that. China is a close runner-up, but Egypt has the oldest calendar. The pyramids are so old that no one really even knows who built them. America would be the newest empire on earth. There are basic 7 people groups associated with geography. You see them there: America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Polynesia, South Asia, and the Middle East. Inside the Mediterranean area, there were 7 empires that arose, starting with Egypt, to Israel, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, Holy Roman Empire, meaning Europe. Eventually, the imperial energy settled in the Americas. That sun and moon are capable of being used to deliver messages is made clear in the Bible in the first chapter. God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years." And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. God made the sun and the moon on the 4th day. Sun and moon are all we know of the concept of marking time. They are either months or years or divisions of those formats. Days as well. Time is the 4th dimension. Time is where stories happen. That eclipses may be seen as signs is reiterated by Jesus in the book of Luke when asked about signs at the end of the age. He says, "And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars. And when these things begin to come to pass, look up, lift up your heads, for your redemption draws nigh." Because God exists outside of time, which he created, he's able to see historical reality and potentially mark that with natural events. This is very tough to comprehend. The 4th dimension of time is notoriously difficult. Because how can you perceive of something outside of time when you live in it? But Einstein's mathematical proof of the fourth dimension was finally confirmed by studies of what else? A solar eclipse on May 29th, 1919. Let's say you're watching a parade. In the third dimension, you have to stand at one spot and can see only one part of the parade at a time. In the fourth dimension, you would be able to see the entire parade, start to finish, simultaneously. And that's the best illustration I got. Past, present, and future are an illusion, no matter how persistent. Einstein said that. This hour is unusual. Solar eclipses are unusual. They seem to create a story of sorts. We seem to be allowed into an idea of light and dark, and we get to make our own decisions. But something has changed in the human dynamic and in the human story. There is something in the air. And how and why would this time be different than any other time? Why would all of a sudden we maybe be able to think about these kind of eclipses? There's a couple reasons. One, for the very first time, all these eclipse maps were put online. The supercomputers got so big that they were able to define when and where all these eclipses went, and they were absolutely right because they're very mathematically precise, these eclipses. And that's only been about 5 or 6 years. And that's probably the reason why you haven't heard anybody else talk about this. And there's probably people all over the world getting ready to talk about exactly what I'm talking about now. Because eventually it becomes top-heavy in thought. Take a look at solar eclipses and see, did they really actually say anything or not? Was there such a thing as an omen in the history of the world? Or was there never such a thing as an omen? Anybody who believed in an omen is just, right? And what's different about right now? Why would we learn about it? Well, perhaps the development of a single worldwide network. But that's another lecture, and it's another riddle. We apparently live in a kind of hollow fractal reality, the smartest physicists believe, composed of kind of electricity, which some of them believe, plasma, living spirit, or consciousness. And this reality, like a hologram, contains layers of patterns and resonances. And that's why you get these weird coincidences that start from top to bottom, and you can't ever get to the bottom of them. David Bohm, who was the protege of Einstein, he first brought this idea of a holographic universe to light in the mid-20th century after the certain discovery of spooky properties of the quantum particles that seem to be everywhere all at once. The holographic theory has since been embraced by many physicists as well as some hardcore Christian thinkers like Chuck Missler. They see it as an explanation for the power of prayer, miracles, and other phenomena. Science learned to project these solar eclipses using templates of cycles that actually turned out to be fairly easy. Are eclipses omens? An omen is a portent or a signal of a coming event. It has been considered an omen by every culture on the planet forever. It is such a universal phenomenon that it can be described as almost instinctive. Solar eclipses, though, can be so rare that they take entire generations by surprise. But since solar eclipses began to be predictable around 1700s, scientists have informed us that they're not omens. And scientists uncovered the clockwork motions of these bodies, which is cool. It's typical, though, of Western thought that insight into the mechanism of a natural phenomena is considered proof that it does not have a supernatural origin. Scientists discover natural mechanisms. But if there is a mechanism, does it necessarily mean that it doesn't have supernatural organism? You look at a car, somebody made it. If one understands the motions, muscles, and hormones that bring about a hug between two loving people, do we know why that hug occurred? Solar eclipses are a clockwork. But what if the clock is somehow set to us? If there is a creator living outside the time domain, then mechanisms that author created could contain the artist's signature. He might set it up that way. It would be similar to a book author leaving clues to a mystery within a text. First accurately predicted solar eclipse, which darkened London on July 13th, 1750, was by Sir Edmund Halley, who the comet is named after. It's absolutely amazing that the very first eclipse prediction was done over the city of London where Edmund Halley lived. It's a very, very, very odd stuff. But Halley said this: "The people will see that there is nothing in it more than natural, and no more than the necessary result of the motions of the sun and the moon." Edmund Halley, 1715. Similar reassurances have been issued up to our time. Before solar eclipses occurred over populated area, anytime a solar eclipse occurs, experts will rush to the papers and remind us that while once upon a time primitive people were superstitious about such things, these days we know better. And they seem to do this every time. Here's some from 2017. From the Boulder Daily Camera. "Today, we know that the sun is a star and that eclipses aren't omens." Pretty straightforward. Here's one from the National Space Center of United Kingdom. "In ancient history, eclipses were seen as ill omens, before people understood exactly what caused this. Now we know that it's just simple geometry, celestial geometry." Here's one. "They thought that it was an omen of disaster and devastation. Those of us who aren't superstitious put no stock in those old beliefs." And finally, from space.com, "Even though most people today have access to science-based information about eclipses, misinformation, myths, and superstitions continue to surround these celestial events." Fair enough. So how did previous generations react? Did they break into spontaneous cannibalism? Mass human sacrifice? Did they pull their hair out and jump off cliffs? Well, some cultures definitely do yell and bang pots and pans and drums to scare the mysterious dark predator that seems to be eating the sun. But for the most part, and you can go all over the world and find this, or you can just go down to the reservations and find it, most people who people consider primitive did all the same thing. What do you think they did? They prayed. They still do it. In Greece, in 585 BC, a solar eclipse made warring Greeks and Medes lay down their arms. Was that a primitive thing to do? Wouldn't that have been a better outcome at the beginning of 1914 or 1955? When I was 32 years old, I was in Nashville. I was trying to make it in country music. And I guess I hit rock bottom. Pretty sure. I was over at a friend's house. They're all jamming in the basement, and I'm just sitting on the couch upstairs. It's past midnight. You can just only imagine what kind of shape I was in, and I'd pretty much given up on everybody and everything. Didn't want to even play music with these guys. So I do what people do. I grab the remote, and I started flipping. And as I was flipping, 32 years old, 1999, I came across a public access channel. You know the cable public access channels? And there was this guy, who clearly the kind of bored professor guy, standing in front of the bored professor class, and he's got the chalkboard, and he's got his thing in his hand. He goes, he's talking about solar eclipses. This is midnight in Nashville, right? And he goes, "Of course, the only reason you can have such a total eclipse like this is because of the coincidence that the moon and the sun are the exact same apparent size in the sky." I sat up. What? The sun and moon are the exact apparent size in the sky? I'm 32. Why didn't they teach me that? You know how much algebra I learned? Or didn't, pretended to learn or whatever? Nobody ever told me the sun's the same size as the moon in the sky. So what I did, when I found that, I was like, I'm gonna check it out, right? Couldn't go to the internet, right? So I actually had to go to a library and look in books. It was true. So then we saw the eclipse in 2012, and it was really cool because I got to see the eclipse with my family in 2012, and it triggered something on my mind. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. That was one of the reasons it really did change my life. I left Nashville. I took a whole different path, looking for the Creator, looking for a relationship with Him. But in 2012, I was like, we got to see the eclipse, and I was like, oh yeah, I should probably say something about how the sun is the same size as the moon in the sky for kids, right? So I wrote a book. It's called Eclipse Miracle. The sun is the same size as the moon in the sky. The sun is the same size as the moon in the sky. It's hard to tell since you don't see them stand side by side. Besides, the sun is just way too bright for our eyes. So why do I say sun and moon appear just the same size? Well, once a dark cloud passed over the sun. The sun's shape shone through for a minute, and then it was gone. It looked almost like the full moon at night, when it's high in the sky and shining its light. I turned away fast from that cloud in the sky. We never look at the sun. It can hurt people's eyes. But I couldn't stop wondering if it's possibly true. Does the sun appear just the same size as the moon? So I hopped on a comet because I thought it'd be fun to find out a secret about the moon and the sun. The sun's a great ball of fire and it's quite far away. The moon is dusty and small, close to Earth's where it stays. But God made them both, placed them just right, so that one rules the day and one rules the night. The sun is 400 times bigger than the moon, so they say. But it's also 400 times further away. So though sun's huge and far and moon's small and near, in the sky, the same size is how they appear. That's because distance changes the way that we see. Just hold your thumb out. You can make it as big as a tree. Or if you're at home, close one eye and pull back your thumb. You might be able to make it as tall as your mom. The sun helps plants grow and makes puffy clouds form. It comes up every morning to keep the animals warm. The moon rises too, but looks different each day, from new up to full, and then back the same way. The new moon is dark, it hides in the night, but it comes back a crescent, a thin, pretty light. Our moonlight is brighter than on neighbor planets, and sometimes we may take this blessing for granted. We know it makes the night friendly to have that soft light. Earth is special to have such bright moonlight at night. In our whole solar system, from Mercury to Neptune, no one else sees the same size sun and a moon. And of course, Earth is the only place that we know where there are animals and trees and children who grow. We don't look at the sun, it blinds people's eyes. And we don't ever see sun and moon side by side. So, how can we know they appear in the sky the same size? Because of an event very rare called a solar eclipse, when the moon goes in front of the sun for a bit, until they perfectly match up exactly in line, and it gets dark in the day and the stars start to shine. Finally, the only thing left of that fiery old sun is its blue-white corona, the only time we ever see one. And as for the animals, they hardly know what to do, because now it's dark in the day and the sky isn't blue. But then the moon, it moves on, daylight's returned. The sun was not gone for long, but a lesson was learned. Because the people who saw begin to realize that from Earth, sun and moon appear just the same size. I know it can't be just chance we get to see such a dance between those beautiful heavenly balls. They shine with a light which by day and by night brightens the way for us all. I'm so thankful our planet was given this view of the sun and the moon and the stars. We've been perfectly placed in a great outer space to remind us how special we are. Every one of you. A message was written in the heavens above. God made this earth, and he made it with love. The end. Oh, thank you. Okay. Is the sun really the same size as the moon? Pretty much. It averages 98% similarity. They are both 0.5 degrees angular diameter. It's about the size of a pea at arm's length. Do it so you know how big they are. That's actually how big they are. It seems bigger. When you ask people, they just say nickel or quarter. Or at least a dime, but it's just the size of a pea. It's an optical illusion, of course, especially when it's coming up on the horizon. The moon's orbit around the Earth is elliptical, so it goes from about 92% similarity to 104% similarity, and it changes every single day. Over the course of its revolution, it averages 98%. So what's the difference if it's 98%? What's the difference between, you got the P, what's the 98% difference? Well, it's about 2 millimeters, which is twice the width of a human hair. So if you think you can tell the difference between one and the other, then that'd be good. That's why scientists even, including NASA, tend to just say, sun same size as the moon in the sky. Quick demonstration. I need sort of volunteers. So let's see somebody with a hand here. Here, hold this one up, would you? Just hold it up. You don't have to go anywhere. Okay, good. Can you hold this one up? Okay, so that's the Earth, right? Okay, if that's the Earth, then that is where the moon would be. That one's slightly bigger than what the moon should be, but I couldn't find a smaller ball. But that's, so you see about 34 feet if the Earth's about 1 foot. So what do you think the sun is? How big is the sun? Anybody got any idea? Okay, so the sun is going to be down there over at the portal on the other side of the Colorado River, 2.5 miles away. And it's going to be the size of a 20-story building, circular, 200 feet. And we're going to be on this, and we're going to look at that, and that's going to make that thing perfect. It's going to completely cover that to the point where sunlight will ripple through the valleys of the moon. Perfect match. 6 months ago in Exmouth, Australia, during the hybrid eclipse there, on Hitler's birthday, of course, one of the only places you could view it was Exmouth, Australia, which is a strange little military town on the west coast. The coverage of the moon over the sun was 100.00% there. That's absurd. There's an ecliptic plane around the Earth. In this thing, you can see it. Sun and moon are capable of entering it every month, but in reality, there's really only usually about 2 complete eclipses a year, but some years have none. The Earth is tilted at a 5-degree angle, which makes them fairly rare. There's different points to a shadow. The moon creates a shadow that's like a pin. You can't hardly make a comparison to the kind of shadow that the moon makes. You can't hardly do it because it's bending down into what's called an umbra, and it writes, and that's where these shadow paths come from. It's like a pinpoint of dark shadow. Around it's a lighter shadow. That's why, you can go to Hollywood, it's 70%. You go to Bluff, and it's sitting right over, the moon's sitting right over the top. There are 4 different kinds of eclipses. The partial eclipse, the ring of fire, that's a cool looking one. The hybrid eclipse, like they had in Australia. And then, oh yeah, here's solar prominences during that eclipse I was telling you about. Look at that. You see the flames coming off the sun while the moon's sitting right in front of it? That's just from this April. There's lots of almost impossible coordinations that happen to keep alive, gravitational concepts, things that go on. The moon is right size to stir our oceans. stabilize the planet. The Earth's tilt is right to give us seasons. Rotation's just right to allow life. There's molecular machinery within our cells, which are impossibly complex and defy all evolutionary models. There's the reality of you and me looking at each other with working optical organs, love in our hearts for people and animals and memories and dreams and all this stuff going on. And then there's this law of coincidence that was installed about 150 years ago. And they say the same thing over and over. Give a large enough data sample and anything can happen. I submit that solar eclipse defies this logic because there's very few of them and they are outrageous. And even more, they're artistic. Solar eclipse creates a story of light and dark. The primal story of all existence. There is light. Darkness seems to attack it and cover it, but light survives. I don't know what I said right here, but it's sure a whole bunch of stuff. Oh yeah, all that stuff. You're kind of looking at, you can see how it all works, the phases of the moon. Oh, there we get to them again. Here again are primitives responding to a solar eclipse. Here's modern Americans. Which ones look crazier, right? 2017 to 2034. Two Tavs, these are the first letter ever created by human beings. The same in Egyptian, Phoenician, and Hebrew. Aleph and the Tav, the first two letters, the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega. The Aleph over the Mediterranean empires. The Aleph moved to America. Here's our years. We have a solar year, 365.24, a lunar year, which is 12 lunar cycles, 354.53, eclipse year, 346.62. Here's our months. We have a lunar month of 29 plus days, draconic month of 27.21, anomalistic, which is how close the moon is 27.55 days. So there's an alignment that happens, okay? Every 6,939.60 days, which is 19 solar years, 235 lunar months, 6,939.68 days, and 255 draconic months lines up at 6,939.11 days. The same phase of the moon occurs over planet Earth. That's why 19 years ago today was very, very similar to right now. It was the same phase of the moon within 2 hours. It will also be the same phase of the moon 19 years from now, on this date. Not only that, but because the draconic calendar is so closely aligned, you'll have repeating eclipse days on the same day. Oh, I got to do that first here. The Metonic alignment means 19 years is very similar every moment. Also, at 391 years, which is the next time it does this, things are really close. These are these wheels of a clock that are turning. So you have repeating eclipses on the same day of the year every 19 years for a time. And then they move on. You know our October 14th eclipse? Look, there's one in 2042, October 14th. Look, there's October 13th, 2061. And then it moves on. It's like this weird clock, right? But then there's this thing called the Saros. And that involves I'm going to go back here real quick. I got to do this. It's every 19 eclipse years, which is 346.62, every 19 eclipse years, which is 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. The draconic months, the eclipse months, the lunar months, which is the phase, and the anomalistic months, which are how close it gets and when I'm going out, they all line up at 6,585 days. So you have repeating types of eclipses that happen every 19 eclipse years. You have repeating alignment of 3 calendars every 19 solar years. You have alignment of 3 other calendars every 19 eclipse years. There's absolutely no reason they do this. The scientists all say, oh, yeah, it's coincidence. It's a huge coincidence. 18 years, 11 days, 8 hours is 19 solar years minus 1 lunar year. That's how weird all this stuff is. So you get solar eclipse personalities. There's about 26 of them going on right now. And they all have their own thing. They have 70 events in their life from like they're partial, they're a baby, you know, and then they grow up a little bit and then they're a complete eclipse and they get really big and mature and then they start dying. About 70 of them, kind of like a person, right? About 12 of them are really weird right now. I don't have time for all of it, right? It's, you know, it's like I'm saying, they just go on and on and on. But this is the one that makes ours. It's called Saros 134. This is the one that's goes, you see over the United States and South America over there, you see the one that's going to be ours? That same eclipse that shows up over us, remember I was talking about the one in Jerusalem? That's the second one from the right. Our eclipse once showed up over Jerusalem in 1933, right? Showed up 9/11, 1969 in Chile, 4 years, right? Before not Chile's 9/11, where they overthrew the Salvador Allende and installed the dictator. Saros 145, which created the one in 2017, here's its lifestyle. It did the A-bomb eclipse. You know, it went over Russia, the decade that they fell apart. It's just all this weird stuff going on. Studies in coincidence. I'm going to have to speed it up, so I'm going to go through some things really quick. I got about 10 minutes. There's coincidences, there's exaggerated coincidences, there's synchronicities, and then there's something else. Here's a coincidence. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, both signers of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. They both died on July 4th, 1826, 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. C.S. Lewis, Aldous Huxley, and John F. Kennedy died within hours of each other on November 22nd, 1963. Those are 3 of the most important men of the 20th century. Abraham Lincoln and Charles Darwin were born on the exact same day in 1809, February 12th. 2 of the most important men in all of human history born on the exact same day. Those are coincidences because you can't put anything else on it. It's interesting coincidences. 9/11 has interesting coincidences as well. They involve numbers. I'm not going to talk about the events of 9/11, but the numbers are interesting. It's the emergency phone number, of course, the most familiar 3-digit number in America. The September 11th is the Egyptian New Year. How many people knew that? It's from the oldest calendar on Earth, 6,500 years old. Manhattan Island was first sighted and landed on September 11th, 1609. New York was the 11th state of the Union. There's the landing at the Hudson, 9/11/1609. They did a reenactment of it. They decided to do a reenactment in 2001. That's September 10th, 2001. With a replica of Hudson's ship, the Half Moon. And that was the next day, it in the harbor. 11s. There are 111 days left in the year after September 11. 9 plus 1 plus 1 equals 11. Trade centers themselves form an 11. They were 110 stories tall. The first flight to hit the towers was Flight 11. Pentagon, the longitude of the Pentagon is 77 degrees. The Pentagon is 77 feet high. It was hit by Flight 77. This album released Dream Theater released an album on 9/11/2001 called Live Scenes from New York. They're a New York band, right? They had to recall this album because of the cover. Dylan released Love and Theft on 9/11. Includes lyrics like sky full of fire, pain pouring down. Things should start to get interesting right about now. Look up, seek your maker, for Gabriel blows his horn. That was the last line of the album, released on 9/11/2001. I don't take it lightly, 9/11, because my mom died on 9/11 11 years ago. And that indeed was 11 years after 9/11. That's my mom. 9/11 eclipses. The last one on 9/11 before the 20th century was in 1616. And then towards the end of the 20th century, there are 3 9/11 eclipses. The first over in South America, just north of Chile, 84% in northern Chile. 4 years later on 9/11, Chile's elected president is killed and the brutal dictator Pinochet was installed. This is a tremendously terrible day in Chilean history. The next eclipse happened over one city, Mogadishu, Somalia, 9/11, 1988. 5 years before the Battle of Mogadishu. Both of those eclipses have U.S. relationships. There's one, a partial in 2007. The next eclipse is in 2360. You can see it's over the places where the hijackers came from. August 21st, America divided. Lots of weird stuff about that one, but I'm going to have to skip it. Move along a little bit. It started in Salem, though, which is shorthand for Jerusalem. This eclipse that we're getting starts just south of Salem. There were 7 cities named Salem in the path of the 2017 eclipse. It leaves at Charleston, the 2017 eclipse. That was the largest slave port in the history of North America, the primary source of African slaves for the nation. Let's look at synchronistic patterns in American eclipses, and then we're going to call it a night. It shouldn't take but about 7 or 8 minutes. Thank you so much for listening to it. I appreciate it. In 1478, the path from Egypt to Spain to America is traced 14 years before the voyage. Of course, Columbus came from Spain. And of course, the eclipse starts in Egypt, the primary source of empire. It's juxtaposition, right? It's like you write songs. And eventually you start to go, that's why songwriters write the way they do. That's why poets do the things they do. That's why artists paint the way they do, because he's that way. Right? You don't just spell it all out and yell at you to get on your knees. You know, it's cool. 1492, there's 2 eclipses. One straddles the American isthmus, so it can connect both continents at the same time, right? That's in April. And the next one crosses Africa 9 days after he lands in the New World. The continents that are most affected by the colonial expansion in 1492 are all in eclipse in 1492. I got to skip the 1500s, but in 1600 there's one from Cape Canaveral where the moon rocket went off, goes to Egypt. Juxtaposition. There's an eclipse swarm as the first settlers are coming over the United States from 1618 to 1632. That's when the Mayflower and all that stuff happens. You'll notice Martin Luther King's birthday in the year 1619, cutting across the southeast U.S. 1619 is when the first slaves showed up, 310 years before Martin Luther King was born. An eclipse cross, 1717 and 1724, center of the Standing Rock Reservation, very near the geographical center of North America. You'll notice that we have a 2017 and a 2024. These eclipses are both 300 years, 44 days, minus 44 days from our eclipses. It's a cycle, another cycle. In the Revolution, there was no eclipses for 16 years, and then all of a sudden, you have 6 of them during the Revolution. None for 24 years after that. This is one I really means a lot to me because I grew up in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, which is in one of those eclipses, which was the end of the Trail of Tears. The Indian Removal Act was signed in 1830. The Indian Removal Act was the greatest treachery in the history of America towards the natives up to that point. Not that we hadn't done terrible things to natives. We've been doing that forever, right? But they signed all these treaties with the 5 civilized tribes, the Cherokees, Osage, and all them. And then they broke them by an act of Congress. They broke the treaties. Davy Crockett says, Davy Crockett opposed it and said, I'm going to stand at the judgment and not have to be beside this thing. He was mad. A lot of evangelical Christians were mad. They thought it was going to bring on judgment by betraying treaties. That's one thing you don't do. You don't give your word and then back out, but that's what they did. 8 months after they signed that bill, 3 eclipses. One on Abraham Lincoln's 19th birthday, cuts through the south, from the lower to the upper, far west up to the east. You'll see it right there. Nat Turner saw that eclipse and he organized a slave revolution, the largest slave rebellion in American history, after seeing that eclipse and taking it as a sign from God. That's a problem with taking them as signs from God. But then in 1834, the middle one follows the path that the Cherokees were walking on from northern Georgia to Oklahoma, where I grew up. It's following the path of the Cherokees while they're on it, a total solar eclipse. And then finally, 3 years later, this one goes right across Washington, D.C., where they were betrayed. Looks like art. Civil War eclipses. This is the Buffalo Swarm. You could have had no eclipses at all during Wounded Knee. You could have had no eclipses at all while 60 million buffalo were being exterminated. Instead, you have that pattern over the far west. First eclipse of the century links USA and Egypt of the 20th century. Cape Canaveral again, 1908, linked with the Temple of the Sun and the Moon. Eclipse Swarm of 1918 to 1932. 4 emanations come out of the USA between 1945 to 1959. The atom bomb eclipse, USA to USSR, US to Iran, after we deposed the Shah of Persia. These are biblical places, right? Big time stuff. The one in 1951 that goes from Jamestown to Angola. The slaves were brought from Angola to Jamestown in 1619. It's crazy stuff, right? And then you have October 2nd, 1959. That's when JFK is running for president. And the eclipse only hits one city in the United States, Boston, where he's from. Total eclipse. All told, 3 of them connect outside of Boston between 1959 and 1970. Why JFK? Because he's a maximum expression of bravery, right? Of being something, of agreeing to something. These are all symbols because we can be maximum expressions in this world right now. Finally, Mount St. Helens, 1979, has an eclipse 1 year before it erupts. 7 weeks after Bill Gates moves Microsoft back to Bellevue. 1984, right over next to Washington, D.C., over Atlanta. Darkness in D.C. in 1984. L.A. Ring of Fire 3 months before the riots. That's L.A. 3 months after the eclipse. Cross Country Ring of Fire goes through Texas, goes up Chicago. And then the 2012 eclipse. The American Cross, the American Aleph. This is the one that comes up next April, 8 days after Easter, back east. Here's the one we're going to do. Our eclipse makes a cross in southern Texas over the town of Utopia in the hill country, 23 and 24. The totals are part of a thing called the Hepton cycle. These are all on Monday. 7 eclipses, all occurring on Monday. Exactly 7 eclipse seasons and 7 eclipse years apart. It's the strangest cyclical phenomenon in all of natural reality. And I have to show you this, and then we're done. All of these are on Monday. This is the greatest expression of the Hepton in all the centuries that I looked at. And it's over us. Here it started in 1891. You can see here's the hieroglyphic experiment. Here's the Hepton eclipses. They kind of organize a little bit, 1909 to 1929, 1927, 1947, some interesting pattern there. 45 to 65, '63 to '83. 81 to 2001. 1999 to 2019. You see the Turkish Tav, that was a big deal. And then us. We live in the maximum expression of Eclipse peculiarity at the maximum expression of human history. And it's okay. It's okay. It's okay to see that it's all big and it's all layered and it's all a beautiful reality. It's okay. The main thing is if God can see the suffering of the Cherokees and mark it with the sun and the moon, God can see, what happened to the Africans when they were taken over here. And he can mark it with the sun and the moon. He don't judge us for that. I didn't do that. Everybody's on their own. Everybody's individual. Everybody's got their thing. History is not some political trip. It's just what it is. But if he sees them and he loves them, he marks everything. He sees everything. It's just what it is. Only thing I would say, because I'm ending it right now, only thing I would say is if there's an author, then we may want to approach the author and see if see what he's got to say to us. And just, say, hey, okay, I get you. And we all know how to do that. And I certainly appreciate the Moab Community Church for letting me come and share a bit of the Eclipse thing. Of course, I've only got half of it done tonight. But that's just the way it is. It just goes on and on and on. And it's all okay. And may God bless you all. Have a great night. Thank you.